Welcome to Unlock the Word, a new podcast where we study the Bible together and endeavor to unlock new levels of relationship with God through His written Word. I'm glad you're here to join us this week. There's a moment in every life when the wine runs out. Maybe you know exactly what I mean. Maybe you're in it right now. That moment when the thing you've been running on, the energy, the optimism, the sense that everything's going to be okay, the strength you've been borrowing from some reserve you thought was bottomless, runs dry. And then you're standing there in the middle of something that maybe was supposed to be a celebration, and yet there's nothing left. That's what happened at that wedding in Cana of Galilee 2,000 years ago. A woman leaned over to her son and said something quiet and simple, yet devastatingly frustrating and trusting. They have no wine. 4 words, no formula, no elaborate petition, no performance of desperation designed to move him to action, just a mother telling her son about a need and trusting that knowing was enough, trusting that his presence changed what was possible. And what happened next was the first miracle Jesus performed in the Gospel of John. The opening move of his public ministry, the first declaration of who he was and what he had come to do. You might think a miracle at a party? That's how you open? Surely you could have started with something more important. Healing a leper, raising the dead, feeding thousands. Something that signals the weight of the mission you've been sent on. But John chose this story. John, who wrote the entire gospel to show us who Jesus is and what his coming means for the nature of reality, opened the account of Jesus' public ministry with a wedding, with a wine shortage, and with a mother's quiet prayer. This is not an accident. This is a revelation. All right, well, welcome back to Unlock the Word. I am so excited that you have decided to join us on this journey as we travel verse by verse through the Gospel of John. Of course, this is episode 3, and we're going to be focusing in on the second chapter in the book of John, specifically the first 11 verses. That's right, we're talking about a wedding. I don't want to be honest with you up front. This passage reads simply on the surface, but runs fathoms deep underneath. So if you came to it looking for a nice story about Jesus being helpful at a party, sure, you'll find that. But if you came asking what John is actually trying to show you about who Jesus is and what kind of God he is, you're going to find something that'll change how you see every shortage in your life. Before we step in, let me bring you up to speed on where we've been. Just do a quick recap of episodes 1 and 2. In episode 1, we lived in the prologue, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. He opens his gospel before creation with this idea of the eternal word, or logos, face to face with the Father, letting us know that through him everything was made, and in him was divine eternal life that we call Zoe. And that Zoe was the light of humanity. That image of God is what we were designed to carry, his life, and reflect his nature. We talked about the fall, how it was an ontological catastrophe, how that image was marred and the light went out. The connection to the source of life was severed. But then that word became flesh and pitched his tent among us, full of grace and truth, to restore what was lost. In episode 2, that theology that we discussed in chapter 1 became personal as we watched John the Baptist point away from himself with everything he had. And we watched Jesus ask 2 disciples the most penetrating question in the gospel. what are you seeking? We watched him give Simon a new name before Simon had earned it, and watched a skeptic named Nathanael, who wasn't sure anything good could come from Nazareth, get loved into faith, simply by being seen in his most private moment. The truth is, the thread running through everything is that Jesus sees people before they present themselves. He speaks identity before it's been demonstrated, and he invites before there's any reason to. He's always moving towards people, not waiting for them to qualify. Today, we're going to see that same character, the same God who sees, who speaks, who moves towards you, show up at a party where the celebration is run dry. And what he does there is going to tell us something about the economy of the kingdom and the nature of God's goodness and what it looks like when his glory is revealed in the middle of an ordinary moment. So without further ado, let's dig into John chapter 2 for the first 11 verses. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now became wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, well, let's start by setting the scene. John chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. So John opens with words that most readers honestly skip past entirely. On the third day. So right off the bat, don't skip those words. In John's gospel, almost nothing is incidental. Almost every detail is doing at least 2 things at once, carrying a surface meaning and a theological weight at the same time. The words "and the third day" is a phrase so loaded with meaning in the Jewish imagination that the moment you hear it, you should begin to stir. The third day in the Hebrew Bible is the day that things come to life. It's the day God gathered the waters and let dry land appear in Genesis 1. It's the day that would later be associated in the most decisive way possible with resurrection. When you hear the third day in John's gospel, you're supposed to feel it. Something is being born here. Something is coming to life. So pay attention. I think it's important to talk a little bit about what we're experiencing here, right? We're at a Jewish wedding. And I want to paint the picture carefully because cultural context honestly changes everything about how this story reads. Most of us are reading it through a 21st century Western lens that misses most of the weight. A Jewish wedding in first century Galilee was not a simple 2-hour ceremony followed by a reception. It was a week-long community celebration. Actually, the Hebrew word for this kind of feast is a mishteh, or a drinking feast, a communal celebration that went on for days. This would be an event that the whole village, neighbors, extended family, friends of friends, everyone was there. And the host family was responsible for providing food and wine for the entire duration. So that responsibility was not just a social nicety, it was a matter of family honor. In that culture, hospitality was sacred. To receive guests into your home was to make a covenant with them. Essentially, you're saying, you're safe here. You are provided for here. And you will not go lacking under my roof. And to run out of wine in the middle of the covenant in front of the entire community was not just embarrassing, it was a public shame that could follow your family for years. So this is the situation that John is setting up. This is not a minor inconvenience for the family hosting this wedding. The wine running out is a crisis. It's the kind of thing people in that village would still be talking about a decade later. And notice the details John gives us, right? Mary was already there, not invited as a guest, but already present, already embedded in the preparations. That kind of insider access suggests that this was some sort of family connection, people that she knew well, people she was responsible to. And Jesus and his disciples were invited, so they came as guests, as members of the community, as people who belonged at this table. But I want to hold on to that for a moment, because the God who became flesh did not only show up in synagogues and temples and solemn religious gatherings, he showed up at weddings. He accepted dinner invitations. He sat at tables with people who were celebrating ordinary life. Think about this for a moment. The incarnation, God, who pitched his tent among human flesh and in human flesh, was not just about the sacred moments. It's about the full range of the human experience, the feasts and the famines, the celebrations and the crises, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons and the moments when the wine runs out. He came for all of it. All right, so we've kind of set the scene with those first couple of verses. But let's talk about verses 3 through 5. It says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. There's a Greek word that John uses here for the term ran out. And honestly, it's worth sitting with for just a minute or so. It comes from the verb hustereo, which means to fall short or to lack, to be deficient, to come behind. And here is what makes this word so significant. It's the same root word that Paul will later use in Romans 3:23 when he writes that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That the same word what they use when they talk about wine falling short at the wedding, this is not just a catering problem. It is an image, deliberate and resonant, of the human condition. We were made for fullness. We were designed to carry the overflowing divine life of God, the Zoe. And yet we're running on empty. We fall short. We come up lacking. The wine of the life we were made for has run dry, and we've been trying to manage the shortage ever since. Now Mary sees the shortage and goes directly to Jesus. And what she said is one of the most instructive things in Scripture, right? Not because of its eloquence or theological precision, but honestly because of its simplicity. She simply says, they have no wine. That's it. No formula, no extended petition, no performance of desperate faith, no list of reasons why God should intervene. Just a clear, direct, trusting statement of what is true. There's a need, and you're here. That should be enough. I think there's a lot of theology actually embedded in just those few words. That's more powerful than most of what we've been taught about how to approach God. So much of what we call prayer is actually just negotiation. We approach God with our case prepared. We demonstrate our faith. We try to say the right things in the right way with the right level of urgency to move him to action. We manage the presentation of our need. But Mary doesn't do any of that. She simply tells her son the truth about the situation. Because she knows him. She knows that he knows. And she knows that bringing the need is enough. Because the one she is bringing it to already loves the people in the room and is already willing to move on their behalf. That's what it looks like to live from that beloved identity. You don't perform your need. You don't justify your request. You bring what is true to the one who loves you, and you trust that his love is enough, and you will know what to do with it. So what does Jesus say back? Because the response of Jesus, and I want to be careful here because this exchange is honestly one of the most misread moments in the entire gospel. Jesus says, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." Now, in English, woman sounds kind of cold. It sounds like distance. It might sound like a rebuke, like Jesus is creating separation between himself and his mother. But the Greek word that John is using here is gonye. It's a term of respect and deep affection in Greek. It's not cold. It's not dismissive. In fact, Jesus uses this exact word from the cross when he entrusts his mother to the care of the beloved disciple. One of the most tender moments in the entire Passion narrative. He uses it again when he speaks to Mary Magdalene at the resurrection. Gonyi is the word you use for a woman you honor, a woman you love, a woman whose presence you take seriously. This is not a rebuff. This is Jesus addressing his mother with reverence. And so basically then he goes, hey, what does this have to do with me? Now the Greek phrase, and I'm going to try not to butcher this too much, is emoi kai soi. Literally it translates to what to me and to you. It's the Semitic idiom that expresses a gentle boundary. It's not a refusal. It's Jesus saying, we are moving into different territory now. What are you asking for is bigger than a social occasion. This is stepping across a threshold. And he says, my hour has not yet come. Now this phrase is heora maru. It's one of the most important phrases in the entire Gospel of John. So let's take a moment to introduce it properly because it will come back again and again. Heora mu. My hour in John's Gospel, or the hour of Jesus, is not a technical term. It doesn't refer to a time of day. It refers to the moment of his ultimate glorification, the cross, the resurrection, the full revelation of who he is and what he's come to accomplish. John uses this phrase 7 times in his gospel, and every single time it appears, it's pointing toward that one decisive moment. My hour has not yet come means the full unveiling of my identity and mission hasn't arrived yet. The complete revelation is still ahead. And yet, and this is the thing that stops me every time I read it, that doesn't mean he does nothing. He acts before the hour. He lets a foretaste of the coming glory spill out into this ordinary wine shortage at a village wedding. The hour hasn't fully come, but the kingdom is already leaking through. So Mary and Jesus are having this conversation, and then Mary turns to the servants. She's heard what Jesus has said, and she doesn't know what he's going to do. She has no plan. She has no picture of what the solution looks like. She just knows him. And so she turns around and says some words to these servants. And they certainly contain the entirety of discipleship, right? Do whatever he tells you. This is the posture. Not understand the plan and then comply, not evaluate whether the instructions make sense before acting, not wait until you can see the outcome before you move. Know the one who is speaking. Trust that knowing him is sufficient instruction for whatever comes next, and do whatever he tells you. All right. That's where we're at, verses 3 through 5. Now, as we get into 6 and 8, we see these pictures of stone jars. It says, now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. 6 stone water jars, 20 to 30 gallons each, set there for Jewish rites of purification. I don't think this detail is decorative, by the way. This is a very rich image in the book of John. And if you understand what these jars represent, I think you get a better idea and understand a little more what Jesus is doing at a level that goes far deeper than solving a problem of catering. So these jars were made of stone. And the reason they're made of stone is really important. Under Jewish law, stone vessels could not contract ritual impurity, unlike clay or wood. So stone jars were used specifically for ceremonial weddings and washings that Jewish religious practice required before meals and before entering sacred space, before worship. These were vessels of the religious system, the instruments of the law. They held the water of purification. That word, that water of purification, is katharismos. Katharismos. Purification. The ritual, the cleansing system that stood at the center of all Jewish religious life. Washings and offerings and sacrifices that were performed over and over, day after day, week after week. They weren't meaningless. They were holy. They were God-given. They served a real purpose. But by design, they were never finished. They required constant repetition because they could only clean the outside. They could only make a person ceremonially clean, but they could not reach the inside. They could perform purification without accomplishing the transformation. They pointed towards something they could not themselves physically produce. And there's 6 of them. Remember, numbers in Hebrew culture mean a lot, right? So the Hebrew numerical imagination, 6 is the number of incompleteness because it's 1 short of 7, the number of divine perfection and wholeness. 6 jars of religious purification were not enough. You were always 1 short of what the soul actually needs. This is the old system. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It doesn't mean it was evil. It was set there for a purpose, standing in its place, doing what it was designed to do. But by its very nature, it's falling short, always pointing forward towards something it could not itself become. And Jesus says, fill them. Fill the vessels of the old system. Fill the instruments of the law. Fill them. Not destroy them, not to discard them, but to fill them with something they were never designed to hold. And the servants fill them to the brim, all the way to the top, not partially, not adequately, to overflowing. I want you to feel the obedience in that moment. Jesus doesn't explain why he's telling them to do this. He doesn't tell them what he's going to do next. He gives an instruction that honestly doesn't make obvious sense yet. And faithfulness in that moment looks like filling the jars anyway, all the way, before you see the outcome. Then he says, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. Now, John doesn't tell us when the water became wine. He doesn't give us a dramatic moment of transformation where someone watches it happen. The servants draw from the jars and carry it to the master of the feast. And somewhere in that act of obedient movement, what was water becomes wine. The transformation happened in the carrying, in the trusting, in the doing of what he said before seeing what it would produce. And when it gets there, these last few verses are so important, because when it gets there in verses 9 and 10, it says that when the master of the feast tasted the water that had now become wine and did not know where it came from, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Okay, let's talk about who this person is, right? The master of the feast is a professional, a man whose entire job was managing celebrations. This would be a person who had tasted a great deal of wine in his career. This dude calls the bridegroom over with something between probably amazement and an accusation. Like, why didn't you lead with this? Everyone knows you serve the best wine first. This was the conventional wisdom of the time. At a feast, you serve the premium wine early, while palates are fresh and appreciation is highest. As the evening goes on and people have had more to drink, the ability to discern quality decreases, so you move to the lesser wine. It's practical, it's good stewardship, it's what everyone did. But the wine Jesus made is not the lesser wine. It's not the adequate wine. It's the wine that stops the master of the feast mid-sip and makes him call the bridegroom over. It's the best wine anyone at the party has tasted all evening. The word that John uses for good here is the word kalos. This literally means beautiful, excellent, of the highest quality. It's not merely functional, not just wine that gets the job done, but kalos is the best possible version of the thing. And when the master of the feast says, you've kept the good wine until now, the word that he is reaching for, he's saying whoever made this wine was not trying to produce the minimum sufficient thing to get us through the evening. They were operating from a completely different set of assumptions about what this moment deserved. And that, my friends, that is the revelation. That the human story has been operating under a particular assumption that we had the best of it in the garden. That what came after the fall was actually a downgrade. That history since Genesis 3 has been a long slide away from what was meant to be. and that the best we can hope for is to manage the shortage as wisely as possible until we finally get to heaven. But Jesus is announcing something here very different. The Father doesn't serve his best wine first and then manage you through diminishing returns. The Father has been saving something, and what he has been saving is not a smaller version of what it was that was lost. It's more. It's better. It's kalos. In a way the original could not fully contain. He's saying that the stone jars of religious obligation are being filled to overflowing with something they were never designed to hold, the grace and truth that's only seen through the Son of God, transforming what was ordinary into something extraordinary. The old vessels becoming the carriers of the new wine, not discarded, not destroyed, but redeemed. And the staggering quantity. Now I want to do some math that some people skip past, because the sheer quantity of wine Jesus produces is one of the most significant details in this entire story, right? Go back to the beginning where we're talking about these 6 stone jars that hold somewhere between 20 to 30 gallons each. That's anywhere between 120 and 180 gallons of wine. Approximately 600 to 900 bottles for a village wedding that was already partway through its celebration. Clearly, this was not a miracle of sufficiency. Jesus did not produce just enough to get through the rest of the evening. He produced an abundance that would have lasted for days, more than anyone at the wedding could drink, and more than the occasion required by any reasonable measure. And that excess, that overflowing, unnecessary, extravagant abundance is itself a theological statement. Because the God who became flesh and showed up at a wedding in Cana doesn't calculate the minimum required amount to meet the need. He gives a place. He gives from a place of such inexhaustible fullness that the gift itself declares something about his nature. Paul will later reach for a Greek word to describe the quality of God's generosity in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, where he says, God is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think. The Greek word is huperikriso. I'm sure I butchered that. But this is one of the most extreme words used in the New Testament. Hyper means beyond. Ek means out of. Periso means overflowing. Put them together and you get beyond, out of, overflowing. Exceeding beyond all excess. The kind of abundance that makes your largest category for abundance look small. Paul is reaching for a word that will strain the limits of language to describe a God whose generosity cannot be measured by human standards. And the wedding at Cana is what that word looks like in a specific moment. 180 gallons of kalos wine, beyond, out of, overflowing. That is who he is. Verse 11 ends this section by saying this is the first of his signs that Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now there's 3 different statements in that one verse, and each one is doing the work of doing a lot of work. So let's break them down. So let's start with the first of his signs. John calls what happened at Cana a sign. He uses a specific Greek word here, and it's worth going over, because John almost never uses the word most of the other gospel writers use for miracles. The word he uses is semeion, which is a sign, not just a miracle, though it is miraculous, not just a wonder, though it is wonderful. A sign is a visible act that points beyond itself to a deeper reality. It's a signpost. It has a direction. It's trying to show you something that cannot be seen directly. The other gospel writers tend to use the word dynamis, power, mighty work, for the miracles of Jesus. John almost never uses that word. He uses semeion, because for John, what matters is not primarily the power that's on display. What matters most is the act it is revealing about the person performing it. The sign is a window into the nature of God, and every sign in this gospel is pointing at the same thing. This is who the Father is. This is what the kingdom looks like. This is what happens when the fullness of God enters the human story. The question is, what is this first sign pointing at? It's pointing at the God who, through the prophet Isaiah, promised, "On this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine." It is pointing at the wedding feast at the end of all things, when the Lamb and his bride are united and the table is set with abundance. No one could have imagined. It's pointing at the kingdom of God breaking in, not in its fullness yet, not while the hour is still coming, but spilling out at the edges, leaking through, announcing itself. The best wine kept until now, the stone jars filled to overflowing, the old system transformed into a carrier of the new. This is not just a nice story about Jesus being helpful. This is the first public declaration of what he came to do. That third statement, and manifested his glory. John says Jesus manifested his glory. And the Greek word here he uses for manifested literally means to make visible, to bring into the open, or to reveal what was already present but unseen. And the glory he manifested, or the doxa, is the same word that's used in the prologue, right? Doxa, or glory, in the Hebrew, is the equivalent word is kavod, which literally means the weightiness, the overwhelming, beautiful, heavy presence of God made visible, right? The Shekinah glory that filled the tabernacle in the wilderness, the cloud that led Israel through the desert, the fire that descended on the temple at its dedication, that glory, the fullness of who God is breaking into visible reality. And John says at a wedding in Cana with 6 stone jars and 180 gallons of wine, that glory was manifested. Not in a temple, not in a formal religious ceremony, but at a party where the wine had run out. The doxa of God showed up in the place of shortage and embarrassment and quiet desperation and transformed it into abundance. The truth is, the glory of God is not contained in the sacred spaces we build for it. It breaks out wherever he is. It shows up at the wedding, in the kitchen, in the crisis, in the exact moment when you have run out of what you needed most. That final statement in verse 11 says, "And his disciples believed in him." The disciples witnessed all of this, and John says that they believed. I want to spend a moment here because it's honestly the most important verb. The word that he uses is pisteo. Again, probably butchering that. I'm trying my best with these words. But it means to believe, to trust, or to entrust oneself to. But in John's gospel, the word is never directed toward proposition. It's never simply agreeing that certain facts are true. John consistently uses the construction of this word to believe in Jesus. What you believe about Jesus, you believe into Jesus. You lean and learn into the full weight of who he is, who you are in the person of Jesus. The way you lean into a chair when you sit down, transferring your weight, trusting the thing to hold you. It's the act of personal surrender to a person. And what happened at Cana moved the disciples from following Jesus to believing into him. There's something about watching the abundance he produced from the vessels of the old system in the middle of an ordinary human shortage to overflowing extravagance. It cracked something open in them. They saw the doxa and they leaned in. Before I close, I want to draw out three things that this sign is telling us about the character of the Father. Three things I believe John wants you to carry with you in the rest of this gospel and into the rest of your life. Number one, God shows up in the ordinary. The first miracle Jesus performs in the Gospel of John is not raising the dead. It's not healing a man born blind. It's not feeding 5,000 people in the wilderness. It's turning water into wine at a wedding. And that's not an accident. It's a declaration. It's showing the Son of God, the Logos, through whom all creation was made, in whom all divine life, Zoe, is located. Thought a village running low on wine was worth his attention. That the embarrassment of a host family in a small Galilean town was something he would give his first public miracle to address. And so the truth is, nothing in your life is too small for his attention. The thing that feels too trivial to bring to him, the minor embarrassment, the ordinary shortage, the small crisis that doesn't rise to the level of what you think God should be concerned with, that is exactly the kind of thing he shows up for. He came to a wedding. He noticed the wine. He cared. He always cares. Number two, God's abundance always exceeds our expectation. 180 gallons of the best wine anyone had tasted all evening before a party that was already partway through. This is the character of God's giving. Not the minimum, not adequate, not just enough to get by, but the kalos, the beautiful, excellent, highest quality, in quantities that make absolutely no practical sense beyond out of overflowing. So wherever you've been operating under a theology of scarcity, wherever you've believed deep down that God's grace and provision and love are limited resources that need to be carefully managed, the wedding at Cana is the corrective. 6 jars filled to the brim, 180 gallons, the best wine until now. That is the economy of the kingdom. Not scarcity management, but overflow. Finally, number 3, the best is always yet to come. You've kept the good wine until now. This is the posture of God toward your life. He's not a God who gave you the best of it at the beginning and has been managing you through diminishing returns ever since. He is a God who operates with divine timing, who keeps the best for the right moment, who is always moving you toward greater fullness, not less, who is always doing something new, always bringing you into more of what he created you for. The whole arc of redemptive history bends in this direction. The prophets described the coming kingdom as a feast, as abundance, as a day when the mountains drip with new wine. Actually, the book of Revelation doesn't end in a courtroom. It ends at a wedding feast. The whole story is moving toward the table. And in your personal story, in the narrative God is writing in and through your specific, ordinary, wine shortage life, the same principle holds. The places where you have run dry, the places where the wine has run out, the places of shortage and embarrassment and quiet desperation that you have been managing as best as you can, those are not the end of the story. Those are the stone jars that he is about to fill to the brim with something better than what was there before. The best wine until now. He keeps it for this moment, and he keeps it for you. All right, let me bring it all the way home and get us closed out here. John chapter 2, those first 11 verses start with, on the third day, the day of the new life, at a wedding in Cana. The wine ran out. Mary brought the shortage to Jesus. He filled 6 stone jars, the vessels of the old purification system, one short of the number of divine completeness, to the brim with water that ended up becoming the best wine anyone at the feast had ever tasted. And John says this is the first sign that Jesus manifested his glory, his doxa, and his disciples believed into him. The stone jars of the old system, filled to overflowing, was something they were never designed to hold. The vessels of the law becoming the carriers of grace, not discarded but redeemed, not destroyed, transformed. This is what the kingdom does. This is what the Father has always been doing, taking what is insufficient and filling it with his own abundance until it becomes kalos, beautiful beyond anything it could have been on its own. That is the gospel. That is what the Zoe, divine life of God, does when it enters the places of shortage in a human life. Because you're not saved from hell into the waiting room of heaven. You are saved for the fullness of kingdom life, that Jesus came to bring. For the abundant life that John has been describing since that first verse in the prologue, for the restoration of the imago Dei in you, the image of God who fills stone jars to the brim and keeps the best wine until now. The best wine. That's your story. That's the Gospel of John. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me in the Word of God today. It's been so amazing to unlock and unpack the scriptures together. If this episode connected with you, do me a favor, share it, send it to someone whose wine has run out. And if you think about it, leave a review here on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find their way to this table. New episodes drop every Friday and Monday, and we are going verse by verse through the Gospel of John. And I promise you, it only gets richer from here. Episode 4 is coming out next, and we're leaving the wedding and heading straight to the temple. Jesus walks into the house of God and finds a marketplace. And what he does there, what he says when they demand an explanation, is one of the most misunderstood and most important moments in this entire gospel. You don't want to miss it. But until then, stay in the Word. Stay in the Word.